In the line of fire of Israeli snipers, Palestinian journalists come under attack on the front lines of the Gaza protests. 2 journalists have been killed and at least 12 injured in the last 5 weeks. So, are they being targeted? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. Thousands of journalists around the world are on the front lines of important stories, often risking a lot to bring us the facts whilst trying hard not to become part of the story themselves. But some Palestinian journalists are accusing Israel of deliberately targeting them as they cover the ongoing protests at the Gaza border. In just 5 short weeks, 2 Palestinian journalists have been killed by Israeli snipers and at least 12 others injured. Israel denies it's targeting reporters, but it's facing international criticism for using heavy-handed tactics. People in Gaza have been under Israeli blockade for years, and many are unemployed. And the weeks-long protests along the Israeli security fence appear to be escalating since they began nearly a month ago. We'll speak to our guests in just a moment, but first, Stephanie Decker reports on the challenges facing Palestinian journalists.
We are in one of Gaza City's main hospitals, and this is where a lot of the injured from these weekly Friday protests are being taken. And the hospitals are struggling to cope because of the blockade that Israel and Egypt maintain on the Gaza Strip, issues with importing medical supplies, medical equipment that are needed to treat the people. Now, one of the patients here is 22-year-old Abdulrahman Qalut. Now, he is a journalist, and there's a video showing what happened to him, the aftermath this Friday, showing the medics removing him, taking him away from where he was injured by Israeli sniper fire. And what is interesting is the amount of journalists, of Palestinian journalists, that have seemingly been targeted by Israeli snipers over the last couple of weeks.
I was taking pictures near the border. Suddenly, a sniper shot at me directly. I tried to run, and he shot another time, and then I fell down and my camera broke. I thought by wearing the flak jacket and the helmet, it would protect me because wherever you go, wearing a press badge should offer you protection. But they shot at us deliberately.
So 2 Palestinian journalists have been killed and 12 injured by live fire. Aside of that, there's the challenges of treatment. As we mentioned, the hospitals are struggling to cope. So Abdulrahman still doesn't know when he's going to get some final treatment because of these kinds of challenges. Now, we've had a report saying that the hospitals are dealing with more injuries than they had to deal with during the 2014 Gaza war, Israel's war on Gaza. And that is an enormous amount of people.
OK, let's bring in our guests now. And joining us from Gaza, Sami Abu Salam, a journalist who is a member of the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate. In Tel Aviv, Asaf Ronel, head of the foreign news desk of the Haaretz newspaper. And in Liverpool in the UK, Elizabeth Witchell from the Committee to Protect Journalists. A very warm welcome to all of you. Sami, let me start with you because you've been covering some of these protests along the Israeli security fence. Why are journalists there being killed and injured?
They have been killed and injured because they are the messenger of the truth. I think because Israel thinks that truth is its enemy. And who carries the truth? The journalist. That's why the Israelis shooting or targeting the journalists by murdering them or wounding them. Especially these events nowadays near the border, near the fence, are peaceful march. I mean, in the Israeli propaganda, most of the time they are talking about Palestinian armed people, Palestinian militia, Palestinian rockets, Palestinian gunshots. But this time it is peaceful. It is public act. No gunshots, no shooting, no rockets, nothing. That's why maybe Israel is cornered by the Palestinian civilians. And who reveals the truth from the grounds, who reveals that Israel is committing crimes near the border? Just the journalists. Okay. That's why they are targeting journalists. They are sorry.
No, okay, yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to interrupt there because I want to just be clear here that these journalists are clearly marked as journalists. I mean, they're wearing vests that are marked as press. In some cases, perhaps they've even got helmets, maybe perhaps in the international journalist cases. Are they also staying back from the fence? I mean, are they engaging in any provocative moves themselves?
I think they have achieved something by the Israelis, by the way, achieved something important. For example, I myself, I used to cover events from near the border, but last Friday I did not, because I am scared. I'm scared to cover because I am sure, I'm convinced that the Israeli snipers are targeting journalists. I am scared to be killed. I'm scared to lose one of my limbs. Actually, maybe 21 civilians have lost their lower limbs because of the Israeli strange gunshots. According to medics, the Israeli snipers use explosive gunshots. And very strange, even so-called gas canister. It is called gas canister, but what is that? I was afraid. I am afraid to suffer suffocation, maybe to die. For example, this is an example of what is called gas canisters by the Israelis, but it is, I cannot describe it what is it, but I can say that it is something strange. And you see this canister, nothing written on it. Nothing. What is the source? Is it from UK, from America, from Russia? Nothing written.
Sally,
and even the ingredients is not clear.
A number of journalists were injured through that gas canister on Friday, weren't they? Is that because
Yes.
they were being dropped from drones?
According to what I have seen, it has been shot by drones or by Israeli military jeeps. That's why they are these canisters are being shot very strongly. And yesterday, this canister hit a boy in the face and opened a big hole in his face. Nothing written on it. So if there is an examination or any, for example, an international committee for investigation, they will find nothing. And maybe the Israelis said, no, it is not us, because nothing, no proof. You see,
right.
I think this means that to hide some crimes.
Just to go back to my earlier question, Sammy, I just want to be clear here. When you were covering these protests, is there anything on you to mark you as a journalist?
Yeah. Actually, when I go there, I have a helmet, a flak jacket, and a gas mask. But despite of that, I would like to assure here, to focus on some point that even the flak jackets, even the helmets, the flak jackets and the helmet do not protect journalists, because the Israeli killers are sharpshooters, they are snipers. That's why when the Israeli sniper killed Yasser Murtaja, despite Yasser Murtaja has a flak jacket, but the Israeli sniper is very clever or very criminal. That's why he shot him a gunshot just beneath the flak jacket. He shot him in the abdomen. And the flak jacket is actually, it protects mostly the chest, but he hit him in the abdomen. And the same with Abu Hussein. Abu Hussein has been also shot in the abdomen. The same gunshot, which even if the Palestinian journalists near the fence, even if they have flak jackets and helmets, they are not safe.
Asaf, Israel says it does not intentionally target journalists. But from what we're hearing from Sami and from Abdul Rahman's story in Steph Decker's report, it sounds like it's the exact opposite.
I think that there is no government policy that is ordering snipers to shoot journalists. I think that even the Israeli government is realizing the damage, the PR damage that shooting journalists will cause the Israeli side because of the media attention that hurting journalists creates. I do think that there is a declared Israeli policy to use excessive force against the protesters, the civilian protesters along the Gaza Strip, and to add to that, there is no accountability to snipers who shot the journalists up until now. I think that the Israeli government is defending those snipers, and instead of finding who was the sniper who shot Yasser Murtaja, who is the sniper who shot Ahmed Abu Hussein, and putting them on trial for breaking the orders, they are protecting them, and by that they are first of all creating an image as if Israeli is deliberately hurting journalists, and second of all, they are not creating clarifying to other snipers that shooting journalists is forbidden. It is against the laws. To add to that, I think that the fact that there is mass usage of snipers against civilians along the Gaza Strip, unarmed civilians, which according to even the IDF spokespersons, 26 Palestinians were shot without carrying any arms in their hands. That is according to the Israeli army. This allows the snipers along the border much freedom to shoot whoever they like. I don't know what happened in those specific cases. There are internal investigations by the Israeli army. I don't know if they will reveal the truth. Personally, I'm doubtful that we will learn what really happened there by those investigations. And I don't know what went inside the minds of those snipers that shot them. I believe what Sami said, that it was deliberate. I don't think that there is a possibility of snipers missing, but when Yasser Abu Murtada was shot, when Yasser Murtada was shot a few days before that, the Israeli IDF spokesperson declared that they know exactly where each bullet landed, which means they take responsibility for that.
Okay.
It changed a bit with Ahmed Abu Hussein. You can notice that he is the only patient up until now that was wounded during the protests in Gaza that was hospitalized in an Israeli hospital. And that is even that the news organization he works for is affiliated with a political party Palestinian political party, which is defined as a terror organization by Israel. And instead of, like they tried to claim about Yasser Murtada, that he is a Hamas operative, they didn't say it about Ahmed Abu Hussein. They are learning that it is not working to try to
that may not be working, but Elizabeth, can I bring you in here? Because still Israeli snipers, as Asaf was suggesting, seem to be acting with impunity. And what message does that send?
Absolutely. If the government does not step up immediately, and if a full IDF investigation into what has happened isn't completed and made public, then all it does is reinforce what's looking like a very appalling pattern of targeting journalists who are covering overall peaceful protests. And it's not, one might think, journalists working on the front lines are putting themselves in danger, and it happens all the time. But this kind of attack does not happen all the time. It has happened, sadly, but it's not, it doesn't make up the majority of attacks we see against journalists, who are targeted in very different ways by, people who are seeking to silence them or in reprisal for their journalism. And to see, forces really opening fire, and to see these high numbers of journalists injured and as well as to killed is setting what is a very unfortunate precedent for
what protection should journalists expect to have covering these sorts of protests? When you do have the Israeli side saying, if you come close to the fence, you are a legitimate target. In these very different and unusual circumstances, what protections can journalists expect?
Well, I think they can expect that if they're carrying cameras and if they're covering something newsworthy, they should expect the freedom to do that. It's an important function of all societies, and an important element of people have the right to know what's going on the ground, and you really can't operate in an environment. You can't simply shoot a journalist because they're doing their job. So I think they do have the right to expect that not to happen, and I think by showing that their press should be the protection that they need, and I think that in this particular case, we need to look at how protests are handled in this region, and that more non-lethal measures need to be employed, and this is not the appropriate response for.
Sami, do these killings have they stopped many of your journalism colleagues from attending the protests and covering them. I mean, you yourself didn't go on Friday. Do you think you'll go back? Are many of your colleagues saying it's just not worth covering it?
I think, actually, I'm one of them, actually. I am one of those who stopped covering, let's say, last Friday, I did not go to the fence because I'm afraid, I think I mentioned, I am afraid that my children will be orphans because the Israeli snipers are targeting journalists. And some journalists also, they have no other choice. It is their main source of living. That's why they are trying to go despite danger, because there is no opportunities, work opportunities in Gaza. This is the main source of living for them. Despite also we believe that this policy, I mean murdering journalists, murdering is not a new Israeli policy. It is very ancient. It is from the beginning of the establishment of Israel. Let's say, for example, during Al-Aqsa Intifada, they have killed Italian journalist Raffaele Cirillo in the West Bank in 2003. They have killed him with 6 gunshots. In Rafah, they have murdered British cameraman James Miller, despite he was raising a white flag. In Rafah, they killed him. They killed him, Sam Abu Zuhra, in Jenin, with a gunshot, and continued. And also, we don't forget Fadil Shana'a, Reuters cameraman, who has been killed on the spot with a cannon grenade, and he has been ripped apart on the spot. It is, I mean, it is the Israeli targeting of journalists is not a new policy for during the March of Return. But this time they escalate. Why? Because in the last era, or in the last couple of years, during the so-called Arab Spring, they are claiming that Israel is the oasis of democracy in the region. And the Israeli army is the world's most moral army. But the Palestinian journalist, or this March of Return, reveals that Israel is the oasis of crimes, of criminals who are targeting civilians so far.
Let's get the view from the other side then. Asaf, if I can bring you in at this point, because what is it like being an Israeli journalist covering these protests?
First of all, personally, I'm doing world news, so I'm not covering the protests themselves. So I'm not there along the fence, so I cannot testify by myself. In general, for the Israeli media, for Jewish Israeli media, Israel is still a democracy. There is Jewish journalists are free to say whatever they like, to go wherever they want, to do whatever they want. If there is pressure, it's not from the government itself. There are the civil society, there are parts of the civil society that are less tolerant to some views. I am working for Haaretz, which puts freedom of speech as its core value, and I am allowed to say really whatever I like, and I even tested the borders of what does it mean. We are as a Jewish journalists are free to do whatever we want, whatever we think it is right for our profession. That's not true for Palestinian journalists, not inside Israel, not in the West Bank, and surely not in Gaza. As for reporting about the great March of Return from the Israeli side, there is no real threat at the moment. There is no danger. There was not even a single Israeli hurt during these 5 weeks.
But you've been tweeting, can I just jump in there? Because you've been tweeting extensively about this, haven't you? And I did see today that you've had a lawsuit brought against you by a right-wing organisation. Are you able to talk about that?
Yes, it's not in details. There was some right-wing organization that their leaders are fighting to kick away all the African refugees that are now in Israel, and I commented about them, and they sued me for my words. Actually, they didn't sue. They threatened to sue. They haven't sued yet. It's still hanging over my head. It's not pleasant. Some journalists, it happens more often, but it's not a governmental pressure on me. It's part of the tensions that are inside the Israeli society. I guess that some journalists are not feeling free to say whatever they like. Left-wing journalists working for Israeli mainstream media, most of it, might think twice before saying certain things because they know they might get hurt.
Okay.
Professionally,
back to
not,
Gaza then,
again,
Sami, if I can jump back to you, because
say.
I should think that many people, many journalists in Gaza also have to think twice before reporting what they want to report on. How politicized is the situation there?
Honestly, we can say that you can say that it is some sort of putting himself in danger, which is not logic, but no other choice. In brief, I mean, they have no, for example, the journalists in Gaza, they have no safety equipments, for example. Why? Also because of Israel, which means that Israel is behind restrictions of covering news from Gaza. Israel is behind preventing flak jackets, preventing the entry of flak jackets and helmets for Palestinian journalists in Gaza. They don't want to reveal truth from Gaza, and I think it is governmental order, it is governmental policies. Let's say, for example, in 1972, Israel assassinated Palestinian writer Wael Zaiter in Roma. Is it governmental or not governmental?
Okay,
despite
all right.
he was not a military leader.
We are running out of time a little bit. I just want to go over back to Elizabeth and just ask her, in the broader picture, how being a journalist in Gaza, both within the Strip and reporting and feeling pressure from perhaps outside of the Strip, how does that compare to other places in the world?
It's certainly emerging at this time as one of the more dangerous environments. I think we're seeing a lot of the same elements that we see in other countries where journalists are being labeled as combatants or being linked to terrorism, rather than the distinction being made between covering and engaging in an activity that might be seen as legally an anti-state activity. So we're seeing some of the same patterns play out that we see in many other countries, where journalists, maybe in another country, they might be detained or arrested and subject to harsh penalties. Some countries we see journalists, targeted for murder. So it's a kind of different scenario, and I wouldn't really like to sort of say one is more dangerous or more difficult or more challenging than another. But I think we're seeing many of the very basic elements, a certain lack of understanding on the part of authorities of what the rights and the role of journalists are, the need for dialogue between media and between government parties and security services to kind of bridge those differences. Okay. And and we are seeing, as my colleague pointed out, what happens when journalists don't have access to safety equipment and good safety training for whatever the reason. In this case, it can be political, but for other journalists, it's a question of resources. These are expensive and difficult things to obtain when you're a local journalist, often working on a freelance basis. So I think we're seeing really, an escalation of many different elements that make journalism dangerous in many countries right now, and it's unfortunate to see see this escalation happening here.
Okay. Well, we will have to leave it there. We've got 3 more weeks of these protests. We will watch closely to see how they are dealt with by the Israeli military. Many thanks to all our guests today for joining us: Sami Abu Salem, Asaf Ronell and Elizabeth Witchell. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. For further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, it's bye for now.